So, good morning everyone, and thank you very much for tuning in to this Grab and Go session. Addressing why security and controls can't be an afterthought when you are embarking on your S4 journey. Today we have 45 minutes and the presentation will be shared with you afterwards. We have a short agenda for today, so we will start off by introduce ourselves and then we will highlight the importance of SAP security and controls and who should be interested. We will then have a deep dive into security and controls domains, and last but not least, telling you why the journey begins now. My name is Mark Nørgaard. I've been working with SAP security and controls since 2009, doing everything from audit to advisory services and also hands-on implementations of various GRC and control solutions. With me on the stage today, I have my good colleague, Gavin. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Gavin Campbell, an Irishman in Copenhagen. I've been with Deloitte here for 5 months, but I've been working in the SAP industry since 1999. When I started working in SAP, there was a release change that was just happening, and customers were going through the transformation to R3. Now, when I look back at that time, I think about how much excitement there was around this thing called the profile generator for helping build roles efficiently. But for me now, having gone through almost my entire career working with the SAP platform and many customers in multiple countries, I'm really convinced that this move to the S4 release, the release that will empower companies to really digitize, this is our once-in-a-generation opportunity to get this right from a risks and a control perspective. So when we think about this, there's obviously every customer comes from a different starting point and are also going through different migration paths to S4. But for us all, we need to make sure that your existing control framework and processes are not getting eroded through the transformation. So if you're already doing sophisticated things like automated control monitoring, it's fundamental that you're going to need to make changes to have the same level of control. So whether it's user access, whether it's business controls, and if you're already getting, let's say, the benefits of automation, every customer needs to think about how they're going to manage their risks and their controls after they get live with the S/4HANA release. So as we rise to S/4HANA and the onset of the cloud, we must make sure that we are embedded as risk and control professionals to, number one, really to make sure we're helping our businesses and our customers manage risk and control, not through the rear view mirror, but really proactively steer the business and be stewards for the businesses. Now, whether you are, let's say, somebody who's a financial controller, or if you're a chief data officer or a CISO, this matters. This is interesting for you. So let's think about it. For a financial controller, whether you're interested in, let's say, working capital, whether you're interested in digital controllership or tools like Blackline and Workiva, for managing the financial control process, or whether you're interested in how you're managing your commodity risk, this move to S4 introduces the potential to do things smarter, better, quicker. Equally, the chief data officer going through such a change, it's inevitable that you're going to have a lot of legacy data. And this is your opportunity as you migrate to cleanse the data, to really, because this data is going to be you're going to build your foundations of your digital journey. So making sure you're getting your data clean in this new platform. Equally, if we think about, let's say, our internal auditors, making sure that number one, let's say the control objectives will be met as the basic human right of when you move, but also looking to see how you can optimize and really enhance during this process using some of the new techniques from SAP, and we'll come back to that later. Or if you're a risk manager, and a risk manager might be interested in, let's say, everything from the anti-bribery and corruption. You might have a perspective on this from your global trade compliance and sanctions. But even now, there's also a new exciting capability that's coming that you can be built on top of your S4, and this is around the sustainability agenda. So imagine if you couldn't just report from your SAP S4 stack on sustainability, but you could also navigate and make business decisions, that you could, let's say, be agile and help your business be more sustainable, be more modern, and give your customers even the choice. Would they like something, let's say, as an example, shipped via one method or created with some type of packaging, to really use this as a differentiator, say, in the regulatory risk. Also, when we think about our CISO, or your chief security officer, most people on premise on their current ECC system, or their are moving from an on premise, are considering now the impact of as they move to the cloud to help them digitize further and have more APIs. So we're moving from, let's say, systems that we used to know really well how to manage the security and controls into the cloud. And obviously there's some great security in the cloud, and Mark will go into details. But the message here is, don't assume that out of the box vanilla cloud will give you everything that you need. So for each of these stakeholders, as risk professionals and let's say as risk people in your businesses, we want to make sure you've got the understanding of the various opportunities that you have as we rise with SAP. I'm going to hand over to Mark, who'll take us through the security and controls.
Thank you very much, Gavin. So first of all, I just want to highlight here that in order to get a holistic view of everything you need to do, you need to use a framework. Whether it's going to be our framework or another framework, that really doesn't matter, but you have to stick to a framework. We have seen way too many times that companies do a lot of right things, but they're struggling to connecting the dots, and also to make sure that they cover everything that you have to consider. That's the reason why we have our framework, and I will deep dive into each of those domains. Yes. So first is about the governance. So governance is basically all about the strategy. What do I want to protect and why? What is my crown jewels? Do I have a operating model in place to make sure, not only throughout the program, but also after the program ends, that we have a receiving organization who is equipped to handle everything within the security and control space going forward. You may have policies and standards today which you need to follow. There may also be a gap, so think about addressing those gaps today. Make sure that the gaps are sorted out during the program as well. And also, how does it integrate with the wider enterprise risk management piece, as Gavin also was mentioning. Moving on to the controls and compliance. Gavin will deep dive into controls and compliance in a few minutes. I just want to underline here that when we speak about security, we also need to think about segregation of duties. So functions which we can't assign to the same user in our organization. That could be, we will not allow people being able to change vendor master data, or in SAP S4, business partner data, and at the same time do postings. So we need to make sure that we have that in place as well before we start actually building something in our system. You may have something which you can leverage as of today, but because of the change in the landscape, it will have to be changed, and that's a very important thing to consider. If we move on to the data privacy and protection, obviously that's a hot topic and has been for a while now. We also need to think that through our S/4HANA journey. So what regulations do we need to adhere to, comply with? How do we classify our data and how do we handle it? What is public, what is confidential, and how do we label that and manage that in our system, in our new landscape? If you think about the data information lifecycle management, so everything from when data is collected all the way to data is destructed, we need to have a process in place. Do that without a tool going to be challenging. So there are tools on the market, just to mention one of them being SAP Information Lifecycle Management, which you can in which you will configure your retention rules, and the system will then make sure that data is archived and destructed in time based on your retention rules. And retention rules really is depending on in which country you are operating. So China, Russia is completely different, Italy versus Denmark. So you can configure that within the ILM solution. When we look at the sensitive data protection, something I found quite interesting and challenging, because when I did my audit back in the days, we always looked at who can create and maintain things in our system. But now we are also equally interested in knowing who can actually display data, who can display sensitive HR data, who can display customer data, vendor master data, etc. So we need to make sure that we also think that through when we are looking at the full picture. There could also be data fields in the system which we can't protect using roles and authorizations. So we may have to use tools like UI masking. What we also have seen many times is that when you do a client copy of productive data to your non-productive environments, very often consultants, internals have wider access in your non-productive environments. Hence, they can see data which they probably shouldn't. That's the reason why you can also consider like data scrambling. So we make sure that only the right data comes down to the non-productive environments. On the application security. So, as I said in the beginning, I've been working with this since 2009. And when we did SAP security back then, it was primarily to protect the application. It was protecting the roles and authorizations, and also the parameter settings, like make sure that the table logging are activated, the security audit log is activated, but also the password parameters, obviously. But now, also indicated by this, this framework, security in today's world spans much, much broader than just protecting the application. But obviously you still have to protect the application itself, so make sure that the security role model is in place. Make sure that we have built some roles that is aligned with how your processes are, and also taking into the account the segregation of duties. That's quite important. When we look about code security, it's obviously there is the SAP standard code, but we also have custom code. Both code needs to be protected. If you do something on your own, obviously you need to make sure that the code that you are coding is secured. Compliant user access provisioning is very important. So we want to make sure that if I work within the master data team and I request access to do postings, that someone down the line stops me from getting that access before it's too late. And we can use tools like GRC Access Control, ERP Maestro, Soterion, just to mention a few, to handle and enable us to control this. Very important. Think about compliance versus efficiency. We don't want to have a workflow with only one approval, but we don't want to have a workflow with 8, 9 approval steps. So it's a trade-off between compliance and efficiency. System hardening is still important, that we make sure that the system settings, parameter settings is in line with what we have. What you have in your old EC system, if you don't run SAP today, it's a new area. But we need to make sure that we configure the system to your needs according to your policies. And last but not least, patch management, something that many companies forget or down prioritize, but it's very important. So I think it's on every one whatever Tuesday in the month, SAP releases new patches on also security nodes, which you need to go through. And you should implement those, not only after project go live, but also during the program. On the infrastructure security, it's quite important to mention here that it depends on your deployment method. Whether you go on traditional deployment like on-prem, or whether you go with the SAP Cloud Edition, it will change how you have to deal with that. But still very important. Also patch and vulnerability management you have to deal with, and not only on the application layer before, but also on the surroundings. If you look at your new landscape, it will be connected to many SAP systems and non-SAP systems. So we also need to make sure that the integrations are secured. Back in the days, we saw very often that the remote function calls, for those of you who know what that is, can be used to jump from one system to another. And the user typically had SAP all. So when I was able to jump from one development system to a test, and from the test to the productive system, all of a sudden I could do everything in the productive environment because I had SAP all. So that's something you need to consider as well. Moving to S/4HANA and the new setup here, in an SAP space, all of a sudden we also had to deal with the database layer now. That's not something I did or we did as SAP security consultants before, but now we have to do it. We also need to make sure that on the database layer itself, that we have the right security mechanisms in place, who can do what, and also how do we protect the data using scrambling or masking on the database layer itself. Fiori frontend is also new. For those of you who don't know, traditionally you were entering SAP from a GUI, and now SAP changed the way it works, so now it's internet connected using a browser, and that with a browser additional risk comes. So we also need to protect the front end now. Wrong way. On the identity and access management, again, the more and more complex system becomes, the more and more systems your end users are requiring to do the daily jobs, the easier we have to make it to get access to the various systems which they need. So if you think about the joiner, mover, leaver process, when someone is joining, we need to make sure that they get the right data in time. They don't have to wait many days or even months to get the right roles to the various systems. Also, when you're moving positions, which happens quite a lot, you need to make sure that the old access are revoked and new access are granted based on the new position that you will now have. Last but not least, when people are leaving the company, we also need a tool in place to make sure that access are revoked. So consider an IAM solution is our recommendation. You may have something today like SailPoint or Savient or whatever is out there, which can be used to do the provisioning. But it's very important to underline, you can't ignore the compliance piece as well. So look at the IAM as the provisioning engine. Look at tools like ERP Maestro or Access Control, like the compliance engine. Again, we don't want to introduce risk to our systems. We also have multi-factor authentication, which we need to think about, and also single sign-on and password reset. So security and controls has in many years been seen as a showstopper, and it's just adding complexity and takes a bit of time. But it's also about to make it easier for the end users. So introducing something like single sign-on or password service will save you in the administration a lot of time, but also the end users will find it much more easy to get access to the systems. We also have the last bullet here is about privileged access management, which is also a very hot topic. You may have heard about tools like CyberArk. CyberArk does everything but the application. Oh, sorry. It can be used on the databases, etc. And now it also integrates with the HANA database. But on the application itself, you may have to use a tool like GRC Access Control, the module called EAM for Emergency Access Management, to handle elevated access on the application itself. Very important. I use this one. Moving on to monitoring and response. So the monitoring and response is a bit more sophisticated software, allows you to deal with cyber threats. So traditionally, there's a lot of solutions out there like Splunk or ArcSight who can do security event and monitoring. But now, because of the complexity and because the SAP landscape is internet connected, you also want to now monitor the application layer. And the old system can't do that, so you need a dedicated solution to handle that. That could be SAP Enterprise Threat Detection, Agile SI, Security Bridge, just to mention a few. So what you do is you configure a lot of rules. I want to look for this, this, and this, and it will throw you an alert if something is happening. For instance, if someone is all of a sudden granting himself SAP all, if someone is changing critical parameters in your system, open and closing the client, the tool will then throw an alert. And obviously, when a tool throws you an alert, someone needs to respond to this alert. So that's the reason why it's also equally important to have a cyber incident response plan in place. And I will assume you already have something today, but also make sure that this new landscape is embedded into this. You can do wargaming to exercise how we handle and how we respond, and then obviously how do we mitigate if something is happening in our system. So in short, you need to consider every domain here to get the holistic view. And very important to underline, a critical success factor is that you combine everything here like the usual suspects, people, processes, and technology, but you also need to have governance and reporting on top. And if you fail on one of them, you will most likely fail in everything here. As I started out saying, whether you use our framework or another framework, it really doesn't matter. You can find inspiration in using SAP Operations Map, quite good and also quite extensive in terms of what it looks for. You can also, if you're more on the cyber part, you can seek inspiration in the NIST security framework. And even you can combine those two so you make sure you cover everything. Deep dive of security, and now over to you, Gavin, to make a deep dive onto the control side of it.
Cool. Before we go on to the controls, I think for me, and this is something that's quite personal, getting that governance right is something that I do see a lot of customers struggle with, and I would encourage everybody to really put the G in GRC, and that's the message I would give on that. But when you think about all the security topics that Mark's covered, and you think about moving from an on-premise current SAP system to an environment where you might be in a cloud, you might be in a private cloud, a public cloud, you might be in multiple clouds, and you might still be interfacing with your systems on-premise. I hope you can see that it's vital that we, as risk and control professionals, we make sure that you're not going to lose capabilities from your, let's say, your control operating model as you move. So this isn't like an option to have, let's say, the various risk stakeholders involved. You need to be involved in these programs to make a difference and also keep your business safe. Now, I thought it'd be good to talk through, let's say, how do we really make this real when it comes to the controls? So if you think about, you might be 6 months before you're going through an SAP transformation, but ideally, before you even get to an SAP transformation, step one would be to really do a detailed review of your control framework. You know, control frameworks do get reviewed periodically, but it's always good practice to do a bit of housekeeping if you haven't done a detailed review of your, let's say, your control objectives before you start. Many organizations find that as they're moving to S4, they want to be standardizing, simplifying, etc. But they might have very different ways of managing their control objectives in multiple companies or multiple countries. So really harmonizing and doing some prep work on your control framework will make you much more prepared for what comes next. But when I think about going through, let's say, an S4 transformation, I think this is where we can deliver massive value to, let's say, our stakeholders if we can increase the control leverage model. So by the control leverage model, I'm talking about moving from very detailed manual activities that take a long time to being able to meet the control objectives using, let's say, preventive controls, or things that are more efficient at doing the job. Now, this is going to matter when you go to S4 as well, because every control objective, you're going to need to review the, let's say, the steps relating to that control anyway, because the underlying business processes will be subtly different. So there's going to be changes coming in the processes, and this is why this is a perfect time. So if I'm looking through the eyes of a customer here, and I'm thinking about being responsible for the controls and wanting to get myself involved in the S4 transformation, I want to make it so easy for my colleagues that are doing their, let's say, their process design in S4 by, number one, highlighting the control objectives that matter. Number two, helping them understand where there are, let's say, areas where this could be optimized or control points in S4, and really saying there's these new points in the process we would like you to consider embedding these preventive controls as you go through that. You know, so what we see amongst customers, we see some companies who are actually, who've got maybe upwards of 50% of their key financial controls are things that can be automatically monitored. And this is where, you know, we're going to talk about leveraging the automation, but the fact that whether you've got a sophisticated tool for monitoring the controls like a process control or a business integrity screening, you can still rely on these, let's say, preventive controls in your business processes in SAP. So before we used to talk about, let's say, vendor master data, and there was some really good controls around, let's say, the sensitive fields or the 4 eyes principles. And obviously vendor master data will become the business partners shared with customers in S4. So there's changes there, but also controls around things like the ability to block duplicate payments. Things like the 3-way match between your goods receipt, your invoice receipt, and your purchase order, and those tolerances. So this is where we can move away from having people doing manual reviews to when we're doing our design of our S4, we can identify these control points that can make the, let's say, how our control framework works in the future so less dependent on, let's say, manual activities, but also frees us up to help, let's say, people steer through the digital agenda that comes next. When we talk about, let's say, some of the technologies that are out there, when we talk about leveraging the automation, so SAP released process control as one really great example back in 2005. You know, my own experience with process control started in 2009, and since then I've helped multiple companies be able to monitor these controls. So they've got the ability to, let's say, get an alert when there is a stock movement of a certain movement type over a threshold, when there's been a posting to a previous financial period over a threshold, when there's more than a number of, let's say, financial periods open at the one time. So these types of the process control has proven to be really awesome at managing, let's say, the configuration. And it's also got more opportunities as you move to S4HANA. With the speed of the new database, we can also do things differently. So controls that would have taken a long time to run before, or maybe you're able to get the responses back in near real time. But not just as SAP helped us with, let's say, process control and that ability to operate the controls, but it's also brought us with tools like business integrity screening, and in the let's say in the future we'll see SAP financial compliance. But these types of tools don't just allow us to monitor the controls and get alerts. There's also the opportunity for intervention. So the same way when you're traveling overseas, or maybe you get an alert from your bank that somebody's tried to use your credit card. This is where we can modernize our control framework to bring more value to the business. And this is what really excites me. And this is why these types of controls, really, we can transform how we work, but there is no better time than when you're designing your new end-to-end SAP business processes to embed these controls. And this is why I'm really adamant that this is the once in a generation opportunity, and probably the once in the last generation opportunity for me, because the last time for this type of radical change was maybe perhaps 20 years ago. But also to think broader, as you've got this, let's say you've got your beautiful, shiny, optimized, let's say, control framework with control objectives that are common. And as you design these beautiful, let's say, control points in the configuration and the transactions that you can monitor from S4, and whether you have, let's say, whether you're using tools for your to automatically monitor or not, you've still got an opportunity to bring additional value, to centralize, let's say, and provide value to your business, to have an internal shared services center. And perhaps you could even use a third party to help you with some of the business processing or some of the technology behind it. But you know, if we think about where we could be in 1, 2, or 3 years' time, we could be, instead of worrying about the outputs and chasing people for updates on what's going on, we can get to the point where we can really deliver on the promise and the expectations of the last number of years. We can have our real-time dashboard telling us what's going on. We can, intervene in real time where it's powered by, let's say, by the automation, but you can also use this to really change the culture and help your businesses be safe and allow you to, let's say, to digitize your business with the knowledge that you've embedded world-class controls during your S4. So my challenge to you all is, let's find a way to, number one, make sure you're not eroding your control framework through the move. And then number two, to look for ways to do things better. That will give you more time to focus on, let's say, on helping the business in more impactful ways. I'd love to hear some questions. We haven't got any questions come through in our Q&A yet, but yeah, I hope you can see that you get the sense that this isn't just another SAP project. From a risk and compliance perspective, this is where we can really stand up and make a difference.
Yes, and last but not least, we started out saying it, the journey begins now. So make sure that you are embedding security and controls as part of building the business case. As Gavin was saying, a lot of things can be accomplished, like we can work smarter, we can reduce time spent on manual controls, and by that reducing the cost of controls, which is also something you can put into your business case, in which you should also do some pre-assessments both on the control framework, but also equally important on the SAP security of the roles and authorizations, to see if these are fit for moving to S4. With S4, a lot of the old transaction codes and is now becoming obsolete. New transaction codes are introduced, and also, as highlighted and probably known to all of you, we are now using Fiori apps. So we'll have to see how the old model supports the new way of working. Lesson number 1. Lesson number 2, stakeholder management. This is a huge program that will impact every one of your people within the organization. Hence, make sure that you involve everyone from day one. Gavin already mentioned who should be interested. So make sure that those are have a table at the seat, a seat at the table, from the day one, to get the right buy-in. And also to make sure that we don't miss out on anything by also using this framework, as I mentioned earlier. Too often we have seen that security and controls are something that is on the side. No one really cares, but my lesson learned from relatively big programs is that you have to embed security and controls in every stream, business streams, but also the data stream, the change management stream, because in the end, we need to make sure that there is a operating model in place to which we can hand over security and controls after project go live. Right tools to enable. I think it's clear that the more complex the setup becomes, the more we want to automate, the more tools is required. It's not, I'm not saying that you have to buy new tools at all, but you may be able to leverage what you have today. But it also, if you want to go for the more sophisticated security, consider tools like SAP Business Integrity Screening or SAP Enterprise Threat Detection may be worth it, and may be worth consider already now. Last but not least, think big from day one, but avoid the big bang. We want to think about sophisticated security monitoring, whether it's security or controls, but you can't do everything in one go, but build a plan, execute against it throughout the program, and the program typically runs for quite some time, so you have plenty of time to get it right. Anything you would like to add on the lessons learned from your long career within this area?
Yeah, I think our job is to be seen to be adding value to the overall program. I think when I started, like back in '99, it was really about, it was almost building the roles to fit the user need. And then SOX came along and that evolved. But now if I think about, let's say, the opportunity for us to bring value, be it about helping you manage your liquidity better, helping you perform your financial close better, to help you really manage privacy, which is like a topic which is very dear to us all. But helping protect your customers and your employees' personal data. So obviously that's cool. And I'm really excited about the potential when we've got our beautiful S4 systems, how we can change the game about sustainability. And in your own organization, if you can be the person that brings the idea and is able to deliver on the let's say, helping your board of directors manage their obligations around the sustainability reporting, but also to help them, let's say, not just report, but to manage their sustainability goals proactively. So there's so many great opportunities out there. I think one question that's come through would be on the iPad here, Mark, is talking about what's your experiences of managing security in a let's say a global S4 program. What kind of experiences do you have?
I think my experience is that it's so important that we're gonna think it from day one. We're gonna embed it into the different the streams during the program. I have experienced that sometimes that's down prioritized, and again, security is on the side. But if you want it to succeed, you need to embed it everything from day one across all the business streams. That's, I think, my main lessons learned. And I see that's the key for succeeding going forward. And also, I was think about that there's a lot of new things that we're going to introduce moving to S4, not only within the finance space, but also obviously within the security and control space. So there is also a new skill set required to cope with everything that we have to do. Fury has been on the side for quite some time now, but still relatively new. Fury development is new. How do we do it the best and secured way? So bringing in the right resources is also equally important. Don't expect that the traditional SAP experts can do everything, but they can't. They can do what they used to do, and they do it good. But as I said earlier, security is much more than roles and authorizations, and change the parameter settings in your application itself. Yeah.
Cool. So we've got a question from, let's say, from one of the participants, which talks around, let's say, the role of creating this control framework and updating it on a continuous basis. So what I would say here would be, yeah, you will have an existing control framework as a baseline, right? As you go through, let's say, your S4 journey, ideally you will be having people in every business process workshop who will be thinking about the controls. And one of the critical success factors during the program is actually about creating the culture of security and control. So it's not in a silo of a program, it becomes a joint responsibility. So there's something there about building the culture. And yes, as you go through, let's say, subsequent changes, you know, as the, let's say, the people, the custodians of the framework, you do need to continually, let's say, review, update, and enhance this moving forward. But I guess this is something that your colleagues would be familiar with doing already. As Deloitte, we've got our, let's say, our control library with several hundred control points in S4, and that would be how we would support our customers to identify where the potential areas for the control and help them, let's say, build that culture within their programs. Now, we've got several other questions on the list, and it's not going to be possible to cover everything today. But before we wrap up, we'd like to thank everybody for your attendance and taking your time. You know, today has been a virtual event, and virtual events are cool, but we cannot wait to be able to host events like this face to face again. So we're really passionate about, let's say, when customers are ready to come and meet us post-COVID, we want to be accessible and here for you. In the meantime, you're very welcome to contact myself and Mark, regardless of which country you're in, whether that's in Nordics or beyond in Europe or even further. Our commitment is we will find the right colleague to reach out and spend some time with you. So I hope you've enjoyed our chat here today. We've enjoyed, let's say, this virtual experience. And I guess I'd just like to sign off again with the once in a generation opportunity. Let's not miss this opportunity, and let's make a difference as we go. Mark?
Bam.
Thank you.
Thank you.